welcoming me into your class. I did this last year and it was a lot of fun. So I'm Kimberly Halk, and as Jill told you, I am a former television newscaster. So I was a news reporter anchor for 15 years. I've worked at all the stations in Salt Lake City, I've worked in Orlando, and I've worked in Baltimore. And with the downfall of the economy, we started losing a lot of news staff, and I started realizing that we were no longer telling people's stories. We'd get 3 or 4 assignments a day, and it turned out to be whatever was easiest to cover. So we started covering a lot of house fires, a lot of car accidents, just whatever was easy to get on the air quickly and move us to something else. And I really started not liking what I did as much. And so I decided that what I was really good at, and what I always got assigned to do up until this point, was telling the great people's story. And I tried to figure out what I could do to continue in a career that I love, but doing what I love to do and what I felt like I was talented in doing. So I started a company known as Family Storyteller. And what I do is I go in and I interview grandma or grandpa, and the whole idea is preserve those stories while they're still around to tell them. So I interview them using the interviewing skills that we'll talk about later that I've acquired over 15 years. I talk to them about their life. I interview their children, their grandchildren. I read their journal and I get their life story. I write it and I narrate it. So this is a whole nother way to preserve your family genealogy. I call it the future genealogy. Again, preserving those stories while they're still around to tell them. And this is just another way to think about writing a life story. So we'll talk about writing techniques. We'll also talk about interviewing techniques and ways that you can go about preserving your family stories on video. Because the truth is, like, even if you're keeping a journal, the future generations will watch a 20, 30-minute documentary on their relative's life a lot easier, and probably more so than if they picked up their journal and read it. So let me just give you an example. So last year I showed a video I did on a 92-year-old grandmother. This year I'm going to show you a video of a man that got diagnosed with cancer. He knew he only had about 6 more weeks to live here on Earth. And his children weren't done having children. And so he really wanted his grandchildren that wouldn't know him in this life to know him through this video. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. So really quickly, we have his children gathered around him. And what we wanted to do was show him telling them stories that he always grew up telling them that they loved and how they remember him. So let's just sit there.
So you guys know I'll tell you again the story of the nacho cheese, in case you forgot. So this, they were down in this poor area of the neighborhood, and they were handing out food and cheese and stuff for the people who didn't have enough to eat. So the lady got up to the counter, and she got her food, and she got her cheese, and she started walking away with all this stuff, and all of a sudden some guy runs up to her and grabs her cheese and starts running away, and she just got so mad, she goes, "That's not your cheese, that's not your cheese!"
He was a man who loved to have fun.
Whenever we had like talent shows or anything.
And he was a man who loved to laugh.
So it was on XERB, see how it goes? XERB, Hollywood, California, baby, gonna love you to death. This is the Wolfman Jack. Gonna knock you on the floor, up against the wall, outside on the sidewalk. So he'd go on and on with stuff like that, and those are 2 of my favorite jokes.
Okay, so do you guys see how a video like that is such a treasure for families? Just being able to, talk about his legacy and create it for generations to come. So a couple of things that I want to talk about. The first is, how do you make people feel comfortable on camera? Do you guys think you could get your loved ones to sit in front of a camera and talk like that?
Absolutely not. We tried.
What was that you said?
We tried. It didn't happen.
Can you talk about why didn't it happen?
I think they were just conscious of the fact that the camera was there.
Yeah, they are always conscious
And
of.
they're trying to act. And I was like, don't act, just be yourself.
Yeah. So this is what we're going to talk about. How do we make them first and foremost comfortable on camera? I dealt with this a lot as a news reporter. The thing you do is you set up the camera, kind of like I have this one set up in the corner of the room. Have someone stand there, have someone be a videographer in case your subject moves around a little bit. But then you have them forget the camera's there. And you say to them, you're going to look at me the whole time. Did you notice in that video not once was anyone looking directly at the camera? Have you ever seen videos where people look directly at the camera? It's kind of off-putting, isn't it? So they're never looking directly at the camera, they're looking at me the whole time. And the next thing you say to make them more comfortable is, this is all on tape, it's going to be edited. If you need to stop and start over again, if you forget something, if you mess up, no big deal. It's not a big deal. We'll just start again. Because I'm going to put it through the editing process. It's going to get edited. This isn't on live television. Just be you, and we're going to have a conversation. At no time do you ever look at the camera. You're looking at me the whole time. And another thing that makes them uncomfortable is when people don't know what questions to ask. And they're basically feeling like, all right, go. Go, you know, they have a whole life to talk about. So you've got to go into these things, and how you put them at ease is you come prepared. So the next thing we're going to talk about is what types of questions are the good ones to ask. The first question should probably be, what is the number one type of question you never ask?
Closed-ended.
Yes or no?
Close-ended. So that is, don't ask any, I wasn't a teacher, so my handwriting's not good on the question. They can answer with a, and I'm going to change because this is the most important part. Yes or no. And that's all they have to say. Don't ever ask a closed-ended question. What do you think is a good question to ask? Maybe some thought-provoking type questions. This is your loved one. A lot of times when I unveil these videos, family members are in tears over the fact that they learned something they didn't even know about their loved one. Because A, nobody ever asked the question. B, they're not reading their journals. And there's just things they don't know because they're not having those types of conversations. So I came up with my top 5 thought-provoking questions that I think are really important to ask someone. And sometimes you need to prepare them because on the spot, they're not going to give you a really great answer. So if I know I want certain things thought about ahead of time, I'm going to tell them. Here's a few things I'm going to tell them ahead of time to come prepared with an experience that they are willing to share on camera because I need that experience and I need it to be well thought out. So the first one for me is always about, tell me about an experience that changed your life or shaped you into being the person that you are. That's a really hard one to come up with sometimes on the fly. Sometimes they can. And sometimes in the conversations, I'm not super scripted, it's a conversation. So sometimes things come to me. I'll usually pray about these things before I go into it. And sometimes questions will come to me in terms of like what needs to go according to the flow of the conversation, what needs to be asked. But these are things I want them to come into the interview prepared to answer. Number 2 is, what makes you you? If I asked you right here, what makes you you? What would you say?
I have to think about that.
Does anyone have a good answer? What makes you you? It's a hard one, huh? So you got to think about it. Those are powerful answers when they're given time to think about it. And they're just fun answers to ask your loved ones now, just to see what they would say. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for? That would be a third question I would want them prepared for. The fourth one that brings really interesting answers. Who's your hero and why? And the fifth one, what has mattered most in your life? What's been the most important thing to you in your life? And from the video I just showed you, what do you think his answer was? Family. Being a good father is how he wanted to be remembered. And the gospel, his testimony of the gospel. He did not want his children to forget how important he thought the gospel was, and he wanted his grandchildren who don't know him in this life to understand that as well.
So you find you get a little bit better balanced answer when it's coming, like, say, from you than, say, from a husband or a wife or something
Absolutely.
like that?
Absolutely. People open up to me, and this is a very important question she asked, because another thing that makes them very comfortable or uncomfortable on camera is how many people you allow in the room when they're being interviewed. When I'm interviewing someone like that, like Harvey here, nobody was allowed to be in the room. When I interviewed his son, Harvey was sitting in the room, and it was so different compared to when I made Harvey leave for his daughters to be interviewed. And the reason why is people, when it comes to emotions and like things that are hard to talk about, have a much easier time talking to someone like me that they've never met than they do to loved ones. But getting that sound so loved ones can see it and have it forever is so imperative. So I would really urge you all to videotape something like this of your family members. Just get a file that you can save.
So how can we do that with our own family members? I mean, they've known us all our lives and stuff.
It is a little harder. I mean, I don't know, maybe you want to ask a third party to come in with these particular questions
Okay.
and see if they'll open up more. A lot of the interviewing and me getting them to open up is the talent that I, kind of honed over the years, and a warmth that you bring to it. You have to bring a warmth to your interview, and you have to bring a good, warm conversation to get people to open up about very private things. Like testimonies are very private things to people. Experiences, the way they love their children, can be very private, hard things for men that aren't used to being emotional. So it's very, very important that you have just them in the room with you when you're interviewing. So they're not nervous about somebody watching them, or they're just more carefree. I get my best sound from them when I make everyone leave. Okay, so now we've talked about some good questions. Now this is by no means the only questions you should be asking. The important thing for me in doing a lot of these videos too is genealogy. Tell me who your parents are, tell me who your siblings are. Let's get it all on video so that as this computer file is passed down from generation to generation, names are saved and genealogy lines are preserved. So that's another important thing. Those are just 5 thought-provoking things that I like them to think about before I come in. Okay, now let's talk about writing. When it comes to creating, okay, we have about 10 minutes left. When it comes to creating, one other thing I want to say about interviewing before we move on is sometimes you will ask a question you feel good about and you really want the answer to, and you will know they're not giving it to you. And they're just not warm enough for that question. Let it go, move along, circle back around to it. Whatever you feel like they're holding back on, you just need a little bit more time for them to get comfortable. Come back around to that same question. I have been in interviews where I've asked the same question sometimes 5 different times. And I will tell photographers, just so you know, if I'm asking the same question, it's not because I fell asleep on you, it's because I know they're not giving me what I'm looking for. And so I will come back around and I'll generally always get the answer. You just got to warm them up enough to feel comfortable in the setting. So that's another important interviewing technique. Now when it comes to writing, did you guys notice any type of writing style in that video? When it comes to writing life stories, if you're not a seasoned writer, most people want to start at the beginning and end with the ending, right? That video didn't start at the beginning. Did you notice there was a wraparound effect? His children, I like a circular writing style. When it comes to writing memorable stories, I like to start somewhere, wrap around with the story, and bring it back full circle. So one thing his children remembered about him, because I talked to all of them, I knew this. I knew they loved his jokes. That was one of the things they were really going to miss, is that whenever they all got together, he told the corniest jokes. And to them, it was so memorable and so wonderful what they loved about their father. So I knew what I needed to do was get them around a room with him and just be like, Dad, tell us that Nacho Libra joke again, or whatever it was. So we started with that and them laughing, and we wrapped around to another joke they grew up loving that he would tell. So that's the wraparound method. So the joke, they're all in a room together, and then we start along with his story. and we tell his life story pretty much in sequence because you kind of need to tell a life story in sequence, and we wrap back around into that one where he's still telling them jokes and they're laughing together. There are many different writing techniques. That's the one I find to be the one that sticks with people the most. It seems to be, you know, the most memorable when they're watching these videos is the wraparound method. So I always like to use that. Are there any questions that you guys have when it comes to preserving your family genealogy using a method like this, creating a family video? Yes, please.
So like if you do your own interview but it's like just you, would it work if you were sitting down if you just put the camera like somewhere off to the side like behind you-ish, or do you need someone to like be filming and moving it?
Well,
Do you think?
I would need someone because of how tightly we shot those interviews. So
Okay.
he was pretty much, use the rule of thirds. You guys are not photography students, so the rule of thirds is they're either in the third of the picture, so you'd always see him off to the side and then a whole thing here, or he's gonna be over here and have the screen here. You put him smack dab in the middle, it's just not as aesthetically pleasing. So use the rule of thirds when videotaping them. If you're going to do something like that where you're not going to have a photographer, you can still somewhat use the rule of thirds, but it's a little dicier because if they move at all during that interview, you're gonna have to set a wide shot. So you're not gonna get the extreme close-ups that I have in the video. You can ask them not to move a lot, but again, that creates an environment where they're not as comfortable in the interview. You really just want them to be natural and comfortable. And some people will sway when they talk to you. Just because it's a nerve thing. They're just nervous. And maybe that'll stop, maybe that won't. But just little things like that. If you're gonna use a video, I'd rather you do it than not do it at all if you don't have a photographer. But keep it on a wide shot. Still see if you can stay within the rule of thirds if possible. And then you might be able to catch whatever kind of movement they may do. Or they might have a story they get excited about and they move a little bit this way. You know, so that's the hard part about not having a photographer. But you also want to be in a setting where you're sitting or standing, but probably sitting because it's going to be a longer interview, but you're both comfortably sitting across from each other. Because if you're up behind the camera trying to watch it while he's supposedly having a conversation with you, you're going to get the effect of him staring into the camera, which is not, it's just not aesthetically pleasing for the viewers. And you're also going to lose that warmth of the interview because they can't directly connect with you while you're staring into a camera. So if that's your only option, is it's just you, then yes, do that. Just do it on a wide angle, and just know it's not going to be quite what you just saw, but you're still preserving the stories.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna make a comment. I really enjoyed how when you put it together that it's like you at the birth of the child, then you would go off and interview. You know what I mean? So even though it kind of it had, I don't know, I like the patterning of it.
Yeah.
It's
So
really good.
and
How
I
you introduce each child in when they came.
I use that a lot, that technique, when I'm doing these types of family stories. And what she's talking about is, you know, in 1970 they gave birth to their first child, Suzanne, and then Suzanne would come on screen and talk about what she loved about her father. And then it just kind of helps the story because it places Suzanne now as a character in his life. And then I'd go on to the next child, and if that one child you would notice in that video was not there to be interviewed. And then I just had to go on to the last child. So for the most part, I do like them to pop up and talk about the interview subject as I'm talking about their births into the family. Because then they become a character into his life story. So that is a very good technique that you guys should also incorporate if possible. Pictures when they're talking about a certain story. When they talked about, you know, our dad taught us to be responsible, and being responsible meant we had chores, and having chores meant on Saturday morning we were outside washing the car. And we had that photo of that old time photo of them outside washing the car with their dad. Those are very important to gather as well. So I'll tell these interview subjects, I need pictures. You told me about a story, I'll have a list at the end of the interview. I'm going to need a picture of this. I'm going to need a picture of all those Honda Civics that everyone talked about. I need a picture of that because every single one of you kids talked about that. And then it just kind of ties it together. What did you guys think about watching the life story of a man you don't even know who he is? Was it boring?
Seems like a good guy with a nice family, you know.
But did it bore you? Because you don't know him, you have no investment in Harvey. I think that's another way. Keep it really tight and succinct. That was only 20 minutes, but we got his life story told. And we told it in a way that we're not going to lose interest. that even though you don't know Harvey, it's an interesting life story. He had something to say, he had something to share. There were things about his life that we can all learn from. And that's one thing I want to carry through the generations too, as a story that's told well, that people actually want to watch and will stay in it from the first minute all the way to the last minute. I also do parents' 50th wedding anniversary, so talk to your parents, get them on tape. Dad, tell me about the first time you ever laid eyes on Mom. She was wearing curlers. How fun was that for that family? Anyway, I think we're out of time, so I really thank you guys for letting me come to your class. I appreciate your attention.